Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar video. This is going to be my last Netflix Avatar video for today, and it's going to be my first impressions on episode 3 and 4. So this is Omashu and Into the Dark. And again, I have not seen the remaining 4 episodes of the season. I've only seen the first 4, and you'll see my thoughts on the other 4 tomorrow. So, the Omashu two-parter, this was actually probably one I've spoken about, maybe speculated the most about, and I was very surprised with the way some of this planned out. Straight away, my immediate thoughts were that, oh, this is like reversed. I fully expected episode 3 would be the one that has basically like 105, the King of Omashu, in it, and then it would be more transitioning into the second episode where there'd be a little bit more heavy focus on like Jet and also the Mechanist and stuff like that. But it was reversed. Bumi only comes into episode 3 like right at the end, and it's the setup like going into the second part of the two-parter. And then the King of Omashu stuff in episode 4 is weird because it is basically the Cave of Two Lovers brought into like book 1, but it's Katara and Aang infiltrating the palace while Aang still has like the events of King of Omashu happen. I would say coming out of this is definitely where I think thematically I think some of this stuff works. Like I actually liked episode 3 quite a bit. I think 4 it started to get a bit messy with regards to what we were doing, where 4 really felt like we have like all of these different plots that we are trying to juggle. Let's just quickly resolve whatever we're doing with Jet here. He's gone. Quickly do whatever we're doing with the Mechanist. He's gone. Because we have to focus this on something else. And I'm not sure how, in this case, maybe how well some of these decisions work. I wouldn't say it was bad, but it was definitely the first time where I've had a big like, that there was some struggles here, I think, in this one, certainly. Because I did like some of what they tried to do. Like, with Bumi, it wasn't just like, who am I? Aang finds out it's Bumi like really early on in his first interaction with Bumi. Instead, it's this kind of, they tried to make a character arc out of it, of like, Bumi himself has lost some of his spark in a way because he has been here the whole time the war's been going on, and it's Aang trying to get that adventurous kind of spirit back in Bumi, like bring back the genius in a way that he was. And I think some of it works, but again, another character to Aang, really heavily criticizing him for his like lack of responsibility, not being around, which makes it all the weirder that they made the decision the earlier episodes to not really it not to be as blunt as it is in the original, that like no he did just run away, but in this case it's like an accident of circumstances what actually happened. And it just kind of happens that he's also struggling in general with accepting the responsibility that's making it hit in any way. So where to even get into here? Theon the Mechanist. I actually thought this was a pretty nice way to do this, because I understand the idea of like, because you only have 8 episodes, I don't think you're ever going to devote the entirety of one to a giant battle just before the actual giant battle. I think from a structure point for this adaptation, that didn't make a lot of sense. So I think moving that to a different point was actually pretty good. And it worked nicely because you did try and create this kind of duality effectively of the idea of people who have been affected by the war and the things that they have to do to survive. The things that they feel they have to do to fight back in some way. And so the Mechanist that is working with Fire Nation contacts to supply them with kind of technological information as a way to create a certain level of security and keep the Fire Nation away from Omashu. And then Jet being incorporated into this as well. kind of highlighting that, like, oh, Omashu have maybe lost some of their fight in the war, and it's just allowing all of this stuff to kind of build up in the background, and I'm trying to actually fight and go after these kind of traitors, and there being these kind of like nuances to it of like, obviously you have the idea of like Sokka and Katara having contrasting arcs, and of course Katara empathizes with Jet, whereas Sokka has more of the arc with the Mechanist, and so they have their kind of favorite, and then they each find out that the other is kind of bad in some way, because of course the bombings in the city have been done by Jet, but the traitor is the Mechanist, and it's, we don't believe each other, but actually they're both creating all of these problems. It is a surprisingly subtle arc, actually, with how it comes together, which is why I want to make it clear, even though there's some weirdness, I think, around the changes. Like, I think it's an interesting way to do this arc overall. I do feel like it probably would have been better if they had maybe had more of an opportunity to do more episodes and split them out in more of a typical way. Just because I did feel that Jet especially felt like, ooh, let's wrap this up here. Maybe they'll bring him back, maybe they'll touch on him again, because it feels like Omashu almost, like we have to, before the season comes to an end, take a look back at what's going on with Omashu, and I'm interested because this episode has led to what seems to be a major change going into season 2 with the whole Cave of Two Lovers plot, and it feels like the following episode, Return to Omashu, might also be impacted as well, because we addressed some of that stuff here. Now, I don't think they did far enough to where I think it would mean that you just can't do Return to Omashu. I don't think you can do Cave of Two Lovers in the way you did it, because you basically did it here. But you can do Return to Omashu if you absolutely need to. But again, I'm intrigued to see if they come back to Omashu and touch on it as like we won in the north, but maybe Omashu's fallen this season, and we actually like see that and cut back to it. Because we do end the 2 episodes with the idea of Bumi's going to fight, but the Fire Nation is coming in, and the implication is obviously that this is where it eventually falls. Bumi, it'd be a bit of a weird arc if Bumi just invites them in and just surrenders immediately after him having an arc of kind of getting his fire back in a way. But, you know, that's just that. And then again, like I said, individually, the Sokka Mechanist arc and the Katara Jet arc, they did some interesting things with regards to, like, Jet spoke in a little bit more detail here than we got from the original about, like, specifically his mother was the one who he kind of learned his skills from. Now, they didn't say anything of significance beyond that. Like, we didn't get a name or, like, where she maybe got her skills from. They also didn't, like, say, bring in the whole Rough Rhinos situation. They didn't really reference it in that way, which was kind of interesting. I would say the only thing with this is just that Jet's kind of arc in this feels maybe, I think, a little bit more forced than the Mechanist does. I actually think the Mechanist and Teo naturally fit into this episode pretty well. The Jet and the Freedom Fighters one kind of does just feel like we had to graft this on somewhere, and it's going here. To the point where, like, just watching the episode the first time, not having a chance to kind of go back over it, I was a little bit like when we see the other Freedom Fighters and they're in the treehouse, I'm like, are we outside Omashu now, or are we just in a section of Omashu somewhere else? I'm a little bit like, huh? What's going on here? Like, it just feels like we hopped to a different episode suddenly, all of a sudden. Sokka and the Mechanist do get to kind of bond over the idea of he hates the kind of like violence kind of part of what's going on, and kind of gives Sokka the advice of like, the world needs more kind of engineers these days rather than warriors, and highlighting that Sokka has a skill at being an engineer, and it gives him the hope and desire to kind of maybe go down that path. But I think part of his arc is also to become a warrior too. So I suppose it'll be interesting as we go forward to see the balance between those two aspects as we go forward. Aang's arc, I suppose, in the first episode was mostly that like Zuko and Iroh infiltrate the city. And so there is a fight between Aang and Zuko in Omashu, with Zuko being careful not to use his firebending. I felt like at times the action was a little bit, in terms of the slow motion, I felt it was a little bit randomly used in the middle of this fight, to where I'm like, to me, if you're going to focus on two benders mainly doing some hand-to-hand stuff, I don't really need you to do slow motion during that stuff. But, it's just that is a pretty minor point overall. The result of this is that this is how we set up the end of the episode, which is that the Fire Nation the Earth Kingdom realizes there's a firebender here somewhere. Iroh kind of gets himself caught so that Zuko can get away. But Aang also gets captured in the streets as well, because of course they had to kind of infiltrate Omashu in the first place. So he gets caught and is brought before the Earth King, while this is what sets up Zuko on the I need to get Iroh back from the Earthbenders arc. Which, while I'm here, that little arc I thought worked reasonably well. The Iroh stuff where he was talking to the Bender captain guy who was participated in the siege, and like his brother died during it. I liked the allusion to Lu Ten, and then they eventually did the cut to the Lu Ten funeral scene, and you got like an Ozai Iroh scene. You got Zuko and Iroh and a little bit of kind of Lu Ten information that I'm kind of interested about, in terms of like, did Avatar Studios give them that? Does that relate to the upcoming Lu Ten information we're going to get in the RPG for the main canon? Or was that just a completely originally constructed scene here? Because like that's always something I've wanted. I've wanted to know more about Lu Ten. So those little hints of like, okay, he was first in officer class, and then obviously the implication of Zuko and Lu Ten having a kind of relatively strong bond, that they know each other pretty well, was kind of interesting. And then that combined with, say, the other scene that they had where we got to see Iroh joining Zuko on his kind of banishment voyage as well, as like the start of their kind of pair up here, was that I thought that was pretty nice, to just address some of that stuff and go into the nuances a little bit, certainly, because they got across the idea of like, yeah, like kind of like Iroh when Aang were talking about in, I think, the first episode. It's this idea of, why was Iroh the one doing the Siege of Ba Sing Se? What was he trying to accomplish there? And he obviously got quite far. Why was he so dedicated to this? And it's that idea of like, he was trying to, in a way, kind of bring peace by ending the war, with victory for the Fire Nation as like the easiest way to potentially end the war, which is an interesting concept for sure. And especially coming from, like, say, like in an episode that kind of highlighted two Order of the White Lotus members, Bumi and Iroh. It was interesting to have them have these kind of arcs where, like, highlighting the path that they've gone on has not maybe been the correct one overall. Which I think maybe brings us into a little bit of the next episode. So yeah, the setup for episode 4, Into the Dark, is that they find out Bumi's been captured and brought into the palace. They're not allowed to just go in there, so they have to kind of infiltrate the palace, and so they have to do this via the tunnels. So this is where the secret tunnel comes in, and we basically do Cave of Two Lovers, just like in reverse, and with Sokka and Katara. The nomads are in there. Chong and the nomads are in there for a second, which was kind of fun. But I thought this was kind of odd in just the way they used this here, because it's like, it's from book 2, and I get it's related. It's like the same location here, but I really did feel this was just an odd situation to have here, and it just felt like you just didn't know what to do with Katara and Sokka, did you? Because otherwise, during the events of the King of Omashu, like, they're just meant to be there covered in genomite. But then this is where it gets so weird, where I'm like, why didn't you just reverse these episodes? Why didn't you have like Aang meets Boomy in the first episode, and maybe in the background of that episode have, you know, Sokka meet the Mechanist, have Katara meet Jet. And so the King of Omashu stuff is kind of mostly done, maybe resolved as we go into the second episode. And then you can really delve into the idea of the conflict between the kind of two more minor characters and what's going on there. And that way you might not even need to do this. But because you created the situation where Katara and Sokka wouldn't have access to the palace, you create this need for them to infiltrate it. And it was just like odd. I think coming out of it, I'm like, oh, you took away that potentially interesting moment at the start of book 2 and what could have been, because you lose an interesting kind of like reveal that Omashu's been taken potentially, and however they're going to do that in book 2. You lose a pretty important like Katara and Aang relationship moment as well. Just a weird one overall. Especially because they gave the Oma and Shu's story, but interestingly, they changed it so that they're both women. So, if I remember correctly, the way they did this here was like, Shu is now a woman as well, which is a clear change from the original, and I'm like, okay, I don't inherently have an issue with that, but I'm like, why did you change that? Because it's a relatively subtle change, like, because all it really changes is that instead of like he died, it just changes to she died, and I'm not really sure like why they in a way bothered to make that change, and like what does that add, take away, or what? Are they trying to do some sort of a thing where maybe this is the truth of the story? Because again, it's a legend, so is this the actual version or not? I'm not sure about that. Like, what are they trying to do? Some sort of a thing where, like, you know, it's mainly only kind of women earthbenders who have been known historically to learn from the badger moles, to maybe lean into the Toph situation a little bit more. Again, just not one that it's like a complaint. I'm just kind of like, that's a literally just a pure detail change that you made, and I'm not sure why you made it type thing. And just as the episode went on, like, Sokka and Katara's arc, like, it's obviously a bit more unique here in that they're highlighting the two of them being kind of at odds with each other. Katara more having an issue with the issue kind of with Katara and Sokka here more comes down to the idea of Katara feels Sokka is like dismissing her and not listening to her, that he's kind of basically going, I'm in charge, Dad left me in charge, therefore you can't decide anything. And Katara's really kind of fighting back against that and actually says like, you're not Dad type situation to him, and that creates a little bit of a kind of awkward silence, and then they kind of come back around, and like she is able to see the idea of, no, like you stepped up when Dad wasn't around, and in a way you stepped up and into a position that's even more difficult than the one Dad was in, where like he had all the time to build up to being and becoming a leader, whereas it was like thrust upon you very randomly, and you have no one there to back you up. So, you know, just kind of giving him a little bit of a praise there. I suppose this is in a way meant to be a little bit of the kind of reverse the runaway moment from like book 3, where Sokka in that case, like, inadvertently to Katara talks about, you know, Katara stepping up in the absence of their mother. So I'm wondering if we may get something similar like that brought up to kind of just reverse it. That could be something interesting to do. The only thing I would say is just that, like, it was very much just, we want the siblings to argue and then they'll kind of come back together. And is it the absolute kind of strongest arc with them? It was decent characterization, I think, is ultimately where I'd settle on with that. Um, what else do I really want to talk about here? This is where like I really immediately want to kind of rewatch the episodes just to kind of get some of the details, some of the dialogue, because I certainly remember at the end of the my doing the recording the reaction videos that I was a little bit confused before I figured it out in my head about like, wait, what exactly happened with the arc with the Mechanist, and like how exactly did they wrap this up, and all of this stuff, because I was a bit confused when Boomy said that line of like, what was it, like Omashu will like rejoin the war, and I was just like, oh yeah, it's because the Mechanist is basically protecting Omashu, that because he's supplying them information, the Fire Nation have agreed not to attack. And then Jet talked about how it's known throughout the city that basically spies have more or less been allowed to sort of roam free without really being taken out. And they resolve. I think part of the problem is that it gets resolved borderline off screen. Like, Sokka just tells the Mechanist, like, you have to deal with this. He obviously decides he's going to do that. And then pretty much the next time you see the Mechanist, Boomy's just like, and you sorted out everything, and we fixed all the problems. And it was just like, you had 2 episodes, 2 long episodes, and we just immediately jumped past that, because there's quite a subtlety to it, like connecting the arcs of 2 different episodes and having Jet and the Mechanist sort of in a way almost suspicious of each other, or at least their arcs kind of intersecting like that. I think I might have jumped past a little bit of the Jet Katara connection, where like he mentions obviously his mother. This is where Katara brings up the loss of her mother as well, that they do bond over that specifically. And yeah, they've continuously shown a couple of Southern Raiders flashbacks here, including we got a pretty direct shot of Kaya, I believe, here at one point, which was kind of interesting to see. They definitely still have the room for the Southern Raiders to do that, but I'm just a little bit like, be careful there a little bit. Like, I know you know what's going to happen here, but let's not go crazy with like over connecting everything, over foreshadowing everything, because there are moments like that that just work in later Avatar, that like it's actually really cool that they've waited this long and then they just deliver really strongly at the end, because you haven't done insane amount of setup and build up to certain moments overall. What else do I want to talk about? We did get the Cabbage Merchant. He was fun in the way he was used. I'm glad they restricted themselves in a way. You sort of worried with maybe the way they were talking about it, of like, oh, we've got the original Cabbage Merchant and all this stuff, that they'd go Cabbage Merchant crazy. But like there was only like 3 scenes. There was like an initial one where the cabbages kind of don't properly get destroyed. Then there was a little one where there was just like Katara was maybe a little bit like, huh, what are you talking to me for? And then they actually get destroyed, and I think it's Zuko who actually destroys them. And then I think right at the end they do have the delivery system moment, and we get a final My Cabbages. That was, I think, pretty much spot on the way they did it. I don't think you needed to do anything more than that overall. Anything else overall? I did like the little moment, I think at the start of it, was it episode 3, when they were arriving in, Sokka looking at the fan that Suki gave him, and Katara actually says like, I liked her too. Just a subtle little moment that I thought was kind of nice, that because obviously that was a one-off episode in the original, they didn't really reflect on what had happened in the episode before, whereas there's little subtle moments that are good like that. And I think that's this show kind of so far for me. It's like, for every clever little expansion they have, it feels like there's over here just a slight little thing that they've not fleshed out in terms of just adapting content that maybe should be here. And the idea of like, to expand something, you need to have the original like mass at its center basically to actually expand onto. And it just feels like it's maybe not all fully there. So their expansion is like keeping almost the same, but we're just doing it in a slightly different way. And it's like, like I'm still enjoying it certainly, but I think more flaws may be coming into things here. which makes me very intrigued to see what they do in the next two episodes. Which, again, like we covered across these two episodes, we basically covered what 105, effectively like 106 to a certain degree, and then we brought some of the other episodes forward, so like 10, 17, and now we're going to go into effectively the kind of 107, 108 stuff, but also 113, and I'm guessing 12 where the flashback stuff will happen, that will come into play. So it kind of really only leaves like, okay, Bato, the use of June, which exact episode is she going to be in? It leaves that in play. We've already done basically some of the waterbending scroll. I don't think we're going to do the Great Divide, maybe a reference to it somewhere. And then the Deserter, like, are they just abandoning that again? I still have questions about Zhao because he was barely in these two episodes as well. But I actually really liked the little moment, because I caught onto it immediately, of just like, oh, Azula is writing to Zhao to get an in on what Zuko's up to, because she heard that Ozai basically dismissed Zhao, who sent this message, that he didn't see the potential in this really, apart from, hey, he sent me some interesting information, but he's an idiot. Whereas Azula's like, no, this is an in. And that I thought was a clever Azula moment overall. But yeah, that's where I'm going to wrap up today's coverage here. So I guess I'll upload this and the episode 2 reaction video. And then we'll build up to some stuff tomorrow, where I'll finish my initial coverage of the show. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on the episode 3 and episode 4. But otherwise, that has been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.